So can you see the Ezekiel's temple? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes. Yes.
You
You
can
can
hear
hear
me
me
now.
now.
Yes.
Good, good. So this is a picture of the Ezekiel's temple, and we are going to look at Ezekiel chapter 40, which he describes the temple. So when you go through chapter 40 and when you study that, it will be difficult to comprehend what he's talking about. That's why I've taken a picture of the temple. This is fairly accurate. There are many pictures people have done it, but this one is very fairly accurate according to what Ezekiel has done. So let me explain it first. After that, we will go and look into chapter 40. Now, let me read a few verses here to start with. Verse 1. In the 25th year of our exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year after the city was struck down, on that very day, the hand of the Lord was upon me. He brought me to the city. He brings him to Jerusalem. So he has a vision of Jerusalem. Let's look at verse 2. In verse 2, he says, in the visions of God, brought me in the land of Israel, set me on a very high mountain. So he is standing on a mountain. Probably we don't know whether it is Mount Moriah, where the temple is there. Maybe it is on that mountain. On it to be the south, there was a structure like a city. So that means he's standing on Mount Moriah. On the north side, when he looks at the south, there is a structure like a city. He looks at a city. Let's move on. Verse 3, please. So you brought me there, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of bronze, with a line of flax and a measuring rod in his hand. So he had two measuring things. One is a long stick, one is a flexible tape, right? One is a stick like thing, it is like a rod, another is a flexible tape. And he was standing in the gateway, he's going to measure the structure which Ezekiel is saying. Let's go on to verse 4. The man said to me, Son of man, see with your eyes, hear with your ears, give attention to all that I am going to show you, for you have been brought in order to show it to you, declaring to the house of Israel all that you see. He's going to measure the temple, and Ezekiel is supposed to declare to the house of Israel, and Ezekiel has done that in chapter 40. Let's move on to verse 5, please. Behold, there was a wall on the outside of the temple all around. In the man's hand was a measuring rod of 6 cubits, each of which was a cubit and a handbreadth. So he measured the thickness of the wall, 1 rod, and the height, 1 rod. That's it. Now we'll go and look at the picture of the temple and we will decide. Now I'm going to describe the temple first. After that, if time permits, we'll go into that, and we are going to continue the session next week also, because there are a lot of things comes in the temple. Now, if you see here, it is a square, totally a square temple. Now, the measurement is used is cubit and a rod or a reed, they call it. When you look at a cubit, it was an old measurement used by many countries, Assyrians and Babylonians and Egyptians, even the Israelites, Ezekiel using the same thing. What is it in the modern times? Now, there are two ways of thinking. Some people say it is 18 inches. 1 cubit is 1.5 feet. Some people say. Some say no, it is 20.5 inches, slightly longer. So whichever we take it is fine. I'm using 1.5 because it's easy to do the calculations. So let us assume it is 1.5. And then he is also having a reed or a rod. It is 8.8 feet in length. Some people say it should be 10 feet. It can be either 8.8, almost close to 9, or 10, roughly. So I'm using it 8.8, the lower version of that. Having said that, if you look at this is a square temple. So you see this one here, square, it goes all the way this thing. So the size of that land is what is that size of that land and where it is mentioned about it. Now, if you look at it, we are in Ezekiel chapter 40. I am going forward a little bit to Ezekiel chapter 45 and verse 2. Let's read Ezekiel chapter 45 and verse 2. Now, he's talking about the land for the sanctuary. Out of this there shall be for the holy place, that's a sanctuary, for the temple, a square round about 500 by 500 cubits, and 50 cubits for its open space round about. You got the idea? It is 500 cubits all around and little bit open space there so that no other building comes around. So having said that, let us now look at the building. Now, when you say 500 cubits, that's what is written as 500 cubits. If you take 1.5 feet, it is 750 feet square. This is 750 feet, this is 750 feet, this is 750. All around is 750 feet square. That is how it comes there. So we have got that one. Now there is a boundary wall. The boundary wall there is, let us read that about the boundary wall. Let's come to Ezekiel chapter 40. It talks about the boundary wall. Let us read verse 5. Ezekiel chapter 40. Behold, there was a wall on the outside of the temple all around. That's a boundary wall. And in a man's hand was a measuring rod of 6 cubits. Each of which was a cubit and a handbreadth. He measured the thickness of the wall. It is 1 rod. And the height is 1 rod. I told you a 1 rod measurement is either 8.8 feet or 10 feet. If you take 8.8 feet, the wall height is 8.8. If you look at it 10, it will be 10. It is immaterial, whichever way. It is around 9 to 10 feet high. And the interesting point is the thickness of the wall is also that much. Now stop and think for a moment. We build a boundary wall around our houses, around churches, temples. No boundary wall is so thick. It's a huge, thick boundary wall. Height and the thickness of the wall is the same. So that's what we are looking at it. Okay. Now, let's look at the picture now. So you see the boundary wall. This is the boundary wall all around. And it is roughly 8.8, either 9 or 10 feet high and same thickness. There are 3 gates. If you see the directions, this is north, this side, this is south. So there is 1 gate in the north. This is northern gate, this is southern gate. 1 gate on the eastern side. There is no gate on the western side. Western side is connected to the temple. No gate. Now you're going to see, if you remember the construction of the tabernacle and the temple, Solomon's temple, both had an outer court. So this is the outer court. Can you see this? Just inside the boundary wall is the outer court. In the outer court, you will find again another enclosure, small enclosure. There again 3 gates. Eastern gate, northern gate, southern gate. This is the inner court. So you find this is the inner court and this is the outer court. And the holiest of holies goes into the brown place. That is how the temple, this temple is constructed. However, from the point of view of dimensions and shape, it is very different from that of the Solomon's temple. Now, having said that, let us come to the gate. Now, if you see the eastern gate, all the gates are same. So there's a gate on the east. This is the eastern side, eastern gate. Now, eastern gate, let's read a verse. Chapter 40 and verse 6 talks about the eastern gate. So he went to the gate. Now, this is the angelic being leading Ezekiel, and every time he goes, he does some measurements. So he went to the gate, which faced the east, went up its steps, measured the threshold. Now, threshold of the gate is we normally have a gate and there's a threshold. That is the width of the gate. 1 rod width. That is, I mentioned to you 8.8 or 10 feet. 1 rod width. That is a normal width of any door we have. Any public building will have that big. Say 8, 9 to 10 feet wide doors are there. No problems. No problems. So that is how the width is there. It is very, very normal width. Now comes a problem. We'll go straight to verse 14, chapter 40 and verse 14. Let's move on to verse 14. He made the side pillars, he's measuring the side pillars 60 cubits high, and the gate extended round about the side pillar of the courtyard. What is we are talking about? Now let's go to the picture now. You see, the width of the gate for man to enter here in the eastern side is 10 feet. No problem. But the side pillar's height is 60 cubits. That is, if you take 1.5 feet, 90 feet high. It's not natural. You have to think about it. It is a 90 feet high. That's how you see a tall opening gate, 90 feet high. And as the eastern gate is, same way the northern and the southern gates. Similarly, you will find in the inner court, eastern, northern, and southern gates. This is how Ezekiel will be explaining the temple. When he explains it, it's difficult to understand, but when you see a picture, we are able to understand how it is. So keep that in mind. The width is normal, 10 feet, but the height is very high. It's almost 90 to 100 feet high. So that's what we are seeing here. Now, having seen that, we also find that there are side rooms. Can you see the rooms here? So many rooms are here on the side near the wall. Here also rooms, here also room. There are side rooms all around where the priest and the Levites and the singers will be able to stay there. So they have the side rooms there, and the side rooms are also mentioned here, what the side rooms are, and they are on all the places. They are known as chambers. Okay. Let's read chapter 40 and verse 12. Chapter 40 and verse 12. I'm taking different verses so that we can understand the temple first, and later on we'll go through the whole chapter. There was a barrier wall 1 cubit wide in front of the God's room on the each side, and the God's room was 6 cubits square on each side. They call it God's room. Sometimes they call it room. No, who are the gods? Levites were the gods. 6 cubits square. It's a square. And it is of 6 cubit. We know that 1 cubit we have taken 1.5 feet. So 6 cubit if you take, it's about 9 feet. It's a square. That's what we are finding. It's a square all around, so many places where the Levites can sit and watch it over. Okay. So that's what he says that. Now, it also says about the distance where it's put, and there are very narrow windows. If you look at verse 16, let's move on to verse 16 now. There were shuttered windows. Shutters are there, looking toward the guard rooms and toward the side pillars within the gate all around. So the guards can also watch through the windows. Likewise for the porches, there were windows all around inside and on each pillar with palm tree ornament. Palm tree ornaments is there everywhere. That's also mentioned here. You remember palm tree ornament was there, if you remember correctly, on Solomon's temple. We'll see that other temples also later on. Today we are going to focus only on this temple. So let's get back to the picture now. If you look at the picture, you're seeing that is a gate, and there are chambers here. They call that guard rooms. Levites will be there, and other people, those who have got the responsibilities will be there. So here on this long surfaces, the palm trees are painted or fixed there. It's like a palm trees will be there. If you see the pictures, it will look like that. So that is what it has been done here. So This is the eastern gate. Now, once you study the eastern gate, northern and southern gate is totally a replica about the same. Now, it is also talks about the height, chambers, everything we have said about eastern gate. Now, if you see the outer court, let's read verse 17, 18, and 19. 3 verses, let us read. Now, let's start with verse 17. Then he brought me into the outer court. Behold, there were chambers and pavement made for the court all around. 30 chambers faced the pavement. Let's go on to the picture now. In the picture, if you see, this is the outer court. This place is the outer court. And he says chambers are there all around. He said 30 chambers. We go round and round. So this is the outer court. It's there on the northern side, on the eastern side, and also on the western side. And all the chambers are around this place. That's what he talked about, the outer court. Now, having said that, we talked about eastern gate, we talked about outer court, we talked about the chambers. Now we'll go to the northern gate. Let's move on to verse 20. As for the gate of the outer court which faced the north, he measured his length and his width. Who is measuring? The angelic being is measuring, and Ezekiel is watching that. Verse 21, please. It had 3 guard rooms on each side, its side pillars and its porches, the same measurement as the first gate. It's just like the eastern gate. Ditto. Its length was 50 cubits, width 25 cubits, same as the eastern gate. Next verse 22, please. The windows and his porches and his palm tree ornaments on the same measurement as the gate which faced the east. So literally he explains the north, but he says it is same as the east. It was reached by 7 steps. So you have to climb the steps to come into enter the gate. So that means outside it is raised up. The whole outer court is raised up by 7 steps. The porch was in front of them. This is how the northern gate is explained. Let's go to verse 23. The inner court had a gate opposite the gate on the north as well as the gate on the east. He measured 100 cubits from the gate to gate. Now what he says is, on the outer side there's a gate. In the inner court there's a gate facing each other. Let's go to the picture now. Shall you see the picture? You see, this is the outer court. This is the inner court. If there is a door and a tall pillar for the gate, similar one is in the inner court. That's what he says. Facing the eastern side, facing the northern side, facing the eastern side. Ditto. So these 3 gates and the outer 3 gates are the same measurement. So this is the northern gate we see, eastern gate we have seen. Let's move on to the southern gate. It's going to be the same description. Let us look at verse 24. Then he led me toward the south. Behold, there was a gate toward the south. He measured the side pillars, his porches, according to the same measurements. Verse 25, please. The gate and his porches had windows all around like those other windows. The length was 50 cubits and the width 25 cubits. Same size as the eastern gate and the northern gate. Verse 26, please. There were 7 steps going up to it, and his porches were in front of them. It had palm tree ornaments on the side pillars, one on each side. Palm tree ornaments on the side pillars. That is verse 26. So that's what he said. Let's read verse 27, please. The inner court had a gate toward the south. He measured from the gate to gate to the south 100 cubits. Let's look at the picture now. See, gate to gate distance is the same. It is 100 cubits. So if we take 1 cubit as 1.5 feet, this is 150 feet distance between the gate to gate. That's what he said. Roughly, he's measuring the certain areas and he's giving it. Ezekiel is getting an idea about the temple. Now, listen, Ezekiel is a priest. He has been trained to serve in the temple at Jerusalem. When Ezekiel was trained, he saw the temple in Jerusalem. He has seen the temple, but he's now seeing something very different. And he is explaining it as a temple, different from Solomon's temple and also the temple which was built in Ezra, Nehemiah's time by the elders of Israel. So he has done all this measurement, north, outer gate, southern gate. So you got an idea now what it is. Basically a boundary wall, gates on three sides, outer court, inner court. The gates also similar in the inner side. And this is the inner court. We are not come to the holiest of all. We'll come to the inner sanctuary later on. Probably not today. We are studying only the outer side today. And having said that, we have covered right up to verse 27. So, having seen that verse 27, let us now go through chapter 40. We are going to read chapter 40. Now you will understand very clearly what we are talking about. We are reading it along without seeing the picture. It's very difficult to imagine what Ezekiel is writing. So let's start with chapter 40. We have already seen up to verse 6, where it says the gate facing the gate. Let's read verse 7. Ezekiel chapter 40 and verse 7. The guard room was 1 rod long and 1 rod wide, and there was, you know what the rod, I have given you the dimension, 9 to 10 feet. There are 5 cubits between the guard rooms. The cubits 1.5 feet, you can take it. And the threshold of the gate by the porch of the gate facing inward was 1 rod. Okay, these are the dimensions he has given. Let's move on to verse 8. Then he measured the porch of the gateway facing the inward 1 rod. Right? So, which is facing inside in the gate. And verse 9. Then he measured the porch of the gate 8 cubits and the side pillars 2 cubits. The porch of the gate was facing inward. So, he is now measuring from the outer side. This is what the angel is measuring, angelic being. Ezekiel is just making a record of that and writing in chapter 40. Verse 10, please. The guard rooms of the gate toward the east numbered 3 on each side. 3 of them had the same measurement. The side pillars also had the same measurement on each side. So by the side of the gate, there are 3 guard rooms on the eastern side. Both sides he is talking about it. Okay. So let's move on to verse 11. He measured the width of the gateway 10 cubits, length of the gate 13 cubits. We've seen all the measurements first. Verse 12, please. There was a barrier wall 1 cubit wide in front of the guard rooms on each side, and the guard rooms were 6 cubit square on each side. So the guard rooms which you find here, let's see the picture now. They're all square guard rooms. That's what he says. Let's go down. You see this guard room, these are guard room. These are all square guard rooms with windows to see and all. Who are the guards? Levites were the guards. So let's move on to the next verse. Verse 15, please. 15. From the front of the entrance gate to the front of the inner porch of the gate was 50 cubits. Now, entrance gate to the inner porch of the gate were 50 feet. Okay. So, he is talking about the distances which is measuring in the outer court. Let's move on to the next verse, please. There were shuttered windows looking toward the guard rooms. Toward the side, it's the same thing, it's repeating. Within the gate all around, and likewise for the porches, there are windows all around on each side pillar, palm tree ornaments. So he's explaining that which gate everywhere, it's a ditto, same size. Same thing were there. So what he has done is, he has done the eastern gate and also shown it. We are going to the outer court now. Verse 17 will talk about outer court. Then he brought me into the outer court. Behold, there were chambers and pavement made for the court all around. 30 chambers faced the pavement. Let's look at the picture, please. He is talking about these chambers. This is the outer court. They are all facing this. So you can come out into the outer court. That's what it says. 30 chambers facing the outer court. Let's move on to verse 18, please. The payment, that is the lower payment, was by the side of the gates corresponding to the length of the gates. It's a payment. You come out of the gate and you get into the payment. Verse 19, please. He measured the width from the front of the lower gate to the front of the exterior of the inner court, 100 cubits on east and on the north. We already said that. The distance between this inner and outer is 150 feet. He measured that. That's what he says. It is 150 feet. That is 100 cubits. Let's move on to the next verse, verse 20. That talks about the northern gate. As for the gate on the outer court which faced the north, now he's talking about the northern gate. He measured its length and width. It's going to be the same as the eastern gate. Verse 21, please. It had 3 guard rooms on each side, ditto, same like the eastern side. Its side pillars and its porches, same measurement as the first gate. Length was 50 cubits, width 25 cubits. Same, similar. Verse 22, please. Its windows and porches and its palm tree ornaments are the same measurement as the gate which faced the east. So what is it? He first described the eastern gate. Now he is repeating that to the northern gate, which faced toward the east. It was reached by 7 steps. Everywhere is a 7 step. So from outside, you can come through the northern gate. From outside, you can come to the eastern gate also. But there are 7 steps. You climb up and you come into the outer court, which is raised up by 7 steps. Now, keep one thing, man. Later on, we'll be reading it. The prince, the leader, will go towards the eastern gate. The Messiah also will enter through the eastern gate. We will be reading that. Now, as a passing remark, I can make a remark. In Jerusalem, when the Islamic people are ruling it, they closed the Jerusalem's main wall eastern side gate completely. You can see the pictures, thinking that Messiah will not go into that. They also put the cemetery there, thinking that Messiah will cross the cemetery. They never understood the power of Messiah. That's all we can say. We can laugh at that, what the Islamic people have done. Having said that, let's move on to verse 23, please. In the inner court had a gate opposite the gate on the north as well as the gate on the east. He measured the 100 cubits from the gate to gate. Same thing. Let's look at the picture. He's repeating the same what he has repeated for this. See, there is a eastern gate, inner eastern gate. Outer northern gate, inner northern gate. That's what he's repeating, the same thing. He gives the same distance, 150 feet, which he gives. This is what the angelic being measures, and Ezekiel is recording it for us. Let's move on to the southern gate. Now we have seen the eastern gate, we have seen the northern gate, we'll go to the southern gate. It is a repetition of the same thing. Verse 24. Then he led me to the south. Behold, there was a gate toward the south. And he measured his side pillars and porches according to the same measurement. Ditto, same thing. Verse 25. The gate and its porches had windows all around like those other windows. The length was 50 cubits, the width 25 cubits. Same measurement, same windows. Verse 26, please. There were 7 steps going up to it. Now, from outside, you can enter through this gate also. There are 7 steps. So, on the eastern side, on the northern side, and also on the southern side, you have 7 steps. Its porches were in front of them. It had palm tree ornaments on its side pillars, one on each side. So, all the 3 sides were similar in all respects. Verse 27, please. The inner court had a gate toward the south. He measured the gate from the gate to the south, 100 cubits. Same thing. Let's look at the picture. He is repeating the same story again on the southern side. Now, he talked about the east. He talked about the north. Now, this is the south. He's talking about the distance from this gate to that gate. So, what Ezekiel is now describing is, he described the outside. He looked at it, he thought it's a city because the wall was so thick. When he come closer, the angelic beings start measuring all these things. He gives the whole measurement. 750 feet square, and 3 gates. He does the detail of the eastern gate outside and inside, and he repeats that to the north, repeats that to the south, and he talks about the outer court. We are done today up to this point. We are going to stop at this point. God willing, next week we are going to the inner court, and then we'll study the other ones. So when we say all these things, the question that comes is, what is that Ezekiel has seen? We are going to discuss it probably the weeks to come. We'll talk about it because the Bible speaks about the building of temples. We are going to see those verses also. First temple, tabernacle was there by Moses, then Solomon. So we'll see each temple, it talks. And we will also see who builds and what happens to the temple. We are going to see that. Right? Now, remember one thing. The writing of the Bible roughly closed around 90 AD. And Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans around 70 AD, where this second temple was destroyed. So keep that also in mind as we are going to see that next week about the various temples. We'll see how many were there. Because there is also some people, difference of opinions there. We'll talk about the difference of opinion also. So what we have seen is this, the vision of Ezekiel, a temple which doesn't resemble anywhere to Solomon's temple or to the second temple which they built. It is totally different. Now, we'll be talking about it next few weeks. And finally, only we'll come to the point, what is this structure and what it will be used for and when it will be used for. Is there any reference in other places? That all these things we will see. And we'll also see when this structure, if at all, because Ezekiel has got a vision, he saw it. It's shown by the angelic being. But Ezekiel didn't build anything. He said, I've seen the vision, that's all. Will this be built or it is just a vision? Is it something which is going to happen? Or sometimes it is something given as a vision, we can spiritualize the whole thing. How do you look at it? All these things will come. You can also give your comments, those who are listening about this. What do you feel about Ezekiel chapter 40? Today we are talked right up to verse 27. What we have covered is Ezekiel's vision of the temple. We have covered the eastern gate. We covered the outer court. We have covered the northern gate. We have also covered the southern gate. All the measurement we have seen the picture so that we get an idea how it looked like. As I mentioned to you, keep in mind, if you don't see the picture, very difficult to visualize what Ezekiel is writing. Now we got a visual what it is. Now, as we go around next week and week, it will going to take few more weeks for us to understand that, because from 40 onwards, he is describing this temple only. You see, 41 also talks about the temple. 42 talks about the temple chambers. 43 talks about the Lord's glory coming to the temple. 44 talks about the gate for the prince. I told you eastern gate. I mentioned it already. And the rules for the Levite priests who are going to be there. 45 talks about the surrounding of the temple. We refer to a verse in 45 to get the size of the temple wall. But 45 will talk about what surrounds the temple. And 46 will talk about the prince coming there and the feast they are holding. And 47 is something new. The water flowing out of the temple. Remember what Jesus said. Out of his belly shall flow waters of living. He said that. Keep that in mind. There's a water flowing in 47. Okay. Then we end with 48, where it talks about the city, Jerusalem. That's how the Ezekiel ends. We are almost coming to the end. 40 to 48 talks about the temple. So we are going to spend quite a few weeks discussing this. And also, we'll be trying to find out what exactly is this vision. And as I mentioned to you, What do we learn from that? That's all we'll see. I'm going to stop at this point. There's just a few more minutes are left. I want you to comment. Feel free to say whatever you feel about it, because when you come to 40, the point of view and differences of opinion are there quite a lot. Because nowhere else it is explained about the what we are seeing about the temple. You won't find much explanation in other places. So feel free to give your comments, and any queries also feel free to ask. We are not saying that we'll be able to answer all the questions. We are coming into a place, it becomes much difficult to understand what exactly is projected there. The time is open for all of you. Feel free and give your comments.